Thank you for coming today. I know it's bright and early, and I appreciate you showing up after the party. I hope you had a really good time last night. Today's session is Don't Panic, What to Do When Your Casper Admin Wins the Lottery. And this is not a heavy technical session. We're not going to get into the API or any command line scripts or anything like that, so hopefully you can just kind of enjoy the story today. And to set the scene, I do have a little bit of a story to tell you, and it's a story of 3 Casper admins. Casper admins A and B, who are on a team, build a JSS, manage several hundred computers over multiple geographic locations. Everything's awesome. Casper admin A wins the lottery and is out of there. Casper admin B has some kind of unspecified later HR event and becomes unavailable at some point down the road. Into this vacuum wanders in Casper admin C, who's not real sure what the heck's going on. This environment is now his. Several hundred computers, multiple geographic locations. And by the way, this is a major public university system and school starts next month, and good luck with that. So obviously this is not strictly hypothetical. This kind of thing happens. Transitions happen, people move on. And when they move, they take institutional knowledge with them. And we can actually prepare for that a little bit ahead of time, and we can also recover from that when it actually happens. So to introduce our cast of players here today, Casper admin A and Casper admin C. Hi, I'm Katie English. I won the Jamf lottery, and I'm a professional services engineer with Jamf Software. Casper admin C, the lucky guy who wandered into this situation, is Robert Witt. He is the Mac team lead at Indiana University within the University Information Technology Services group. And apparently he's fond of free fall. So he's here today to talk about his experience in this period of transition and also how he and his team managed to recover and thrive in this environment. So it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Witt.
Thanks a lot, Katie. I appreciate it. I'm Robert Witt. I'm the Device Management Systems Engineer at Indiana University. And like Katie said, I did start skydiving, but I didn't until after I took this job because, quite frankly, nothing was as frightening anymore. So I work for a group called Leverage Services. And what we do is, part of what we do is we provide managed solutions for university departments, so centralized management solutions around the university. What we also do is we provide a standardized technology build for the labs around several campuses. I joined the team August 1st, 2013. So, when you start a new job, you usually have some expectations about what to expect. But usually when you start the job, there's going to be some reality that sets in, right? There's what you think the job's going to be, and then there's what the job ends up actually being when you start. So my first day, I walk in the door. My manager greets me and immediately escorts me into another room where he closes the door. And that's when I learned the horrifying truth. All right, well, it wasn't that horrifying. However, there was some bad news. And there was some more bad news. And there was a little bit of good news kind of mixed into all of this. So, what is the bad news? Well, there is apparently an I in team, as in I was the Mac team. There were 75 known software requests that had not been completed, and I emphasize known simply because we may have found some additional ones as we went along. And as we all know in higher ed, faculty are extraordinarily good at turning in their software requests on time. And there was less than 30 days to the start of classes. Now, this isn't really that horrible, right? It's kind of bad, but it's not horrible. But there was some more bad news. No one had any passwords. No passwords means we can't get the JSS, and we can't get to the server hosting the JSS. So I spent a majority of the first day contemplating my situation, kind of really taking stock of what I should do. And I actually started seeking the advice of what would become one of my most trusted advisors over the next year. And I kid you not, that is what it said on the first day. Outlook not so good. But there was some good news mixed in with all this. First of all, as far as I knew, the existing environment was working. Now, of course, I couldn't access anything and verify this, but at least there wasn't a lot of complaints or, that's not something they mentioned. So as far as I knew, the lab build was out there, people were using machines, and the existing environment worked. So that was good news. My manager actually did two very important things that helped transition me into this position. Ahead of time, he contacted the previous Mac engineer who had left 8 months prior to me arriving. And she was able to forward over to me some very important documentation because I didn't know where anything was at the time. I didn't know where documentation was stored. I didn't know anything about the environment. We couldn't access things. But this provided me at least with information on how they had created the environment, some settings on how they set the JSS up, and also information on their customizations that they were deploying to the labs. So this actually provided me at least with information I could look at until we could gain access to the JSS. The second thing was he brought in a consultant who had done the jump start for the previous Mac team. His name was Kevin White. I didn't know him at all. I was told he knew something about Mac management and wrote a book or something. So he did write a few things, I guess, and knew something about Mac management. But he would become very important into gaining access to the JSS. So if you see Kevin White, tell him I said thank you. So to gain access to the JSS, what is it that we could do? Well, first of all, there was a lot of talk of just, we had physical access to the server hosting the JSS. Let's just change the administrative password so we can gain access to the server, right? I was a little hesitant at least at first because I'm like, let's at least take some time, look for documentation, talk to people, see if we can figure out what the passwords are initially before we make any drastic moves, right? Especially on my first day. I was like, let's not have my first day be the day we break into the server, right? Let's make that a day 2 item, which we did. So day 2, we decided to change the server host, or the admin password on the server hosting the JSS. If you talk to Kevin White about this story, you may get a more detailed version of this and a slightly varied version. So feel free to, if you see him, ask him about this particular story. So the server here was running it was an X server running 10.6.8. So it was a fairly standard procedure. It was just locate the installation media, you boot to that disk, and you run the password reset utility. So once we did that, we were able to actually get into the server hosting the JSS. But the problem really was still with the database, right? Because we didn't know any of the passwords. But Kevin was like, okay, I did the jump start, so if they didn't change anything, the standard username and password used in the installation is going to be the same, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I come in from an environment where that would be bad. So I didn't have my hopes up as far as this being the case. But it was. So we were actually, once we got access, we were able to look at the Casper database. To do this, Kevin grabbed this cool little application called SQL Pro. The idea being that we were going to use SQL Pro to connect to the MySQL database that was running on that server. We were going to look for something. We weren't sure really what we were looking for yet. And hopefully, that was going to help us out. Oh, come on. There we go. So here's a picture of SQL Pro. Now, I'm told, when I originally did these slides, I may have been slightly too specific about the steps that we took to gain access to the JSS. So I was asked to alter a few of these slides. So just bear with me on this. So here we have, we're just connecting to the local database. It's the standard username and password. And here we have connected to the database, and here's all the tables listed on the left. We find the table we want, and we find the item in the table that we want, and we make the change. And we have access to the JSS now. So I'm now able to log into the JSS as an administrator. But now we need to do a little bit of house cleaning, right? So we want to ensure that backups are running. And so on OS 10, really, it's pretty basic. It's the JSS database utility located in the library JSS bin directory. And that just looks like this. So this we were able to look at and say, okay, at least they have backups are running at 2 a.m., and that's the directory that they're running in. So we were able to look in that directory, verify that backups indeed were running, and that was at least good. This was also, we also verified this was running on the university has a Tivoli Storage Manager service that runs, so it was subscribed to that service as well, and so that was also the other backup that was taking place. And we also scheduled a JSS health check. So we had time with an engineer that did a WebEx connection with us and just verified that everything looked good from Jamf's perspective on our environment before we decided to move forward. Moving forward, really, it was preparing for the fall semester was our first priority because, again, less than 30 days. We had a lot of software requests we had to take care of. Kevin came back for a few days, actually, and helped me package software, and we were very close. I think we got a majority of the software done on day one. There was a few outstanding requests, and usually it was outside of our control for various reasons, or we received all of the last-minute requests that faculty submitted later. But overall, it went very well. But now it was a matter of locating documentation, really. I spent a lot of time that first month just locating documentation. What I found was there was a main file server, and you know these file servers. They're the file servers that people create that have the multiple copies of documentation, nested folders, and more nested folders. There was also a SharePoint site that had some documentation, and now we seem to also be using a product called Confluence. So there was multiple locations where this documentation was spread around. So I spent some time kind of consolidating that, and quite honestly, I'm not even sure if on that file server I've been through every folder that's in there yet. And also there was other servers that we had to gain access to. So I spent some time, I did actually locate the passwords for some of them after speaking with some individuals who'd been working on the Mac team in the past. But for a few of them, we did actually have to force password changes on the admin accounts as well. So this next one was really, okay, now that we're kind of up and running, we need to start looking at all of the existing outstanding support requests, right? And I realized then our next priority became pretty clear because there was a fairly common theme as I started reading these emails and these support tickets that would come in. Can anyone guess what that theme actually is from some of this? Well, first of all, bad communication or no communication, and there's been some issues for several months that are outstanding. So that really outlined my next priority, which was, we need to improve customer relations. We need to really take a look at this and start first addressing the outstanding issues, but also establishing proper contact for support. Because I think what had happened after I really started looking at this is, when you're providing support, you establish relationships with people, right? And people get used to talking to you. And so I think in this case, all of these users had become so used to talking with a very specific individual, when that individual became unavailable, they didn't know who to talk to. And so what ended up happening was they would talk to someone they knew, they would get forwarded, and they ended up in that horrible support loop that happens at the university, right? Which all that does is it just increases the frustration level of those users. So by the time they finally found their way back to me, it was some interesting conversations. So response time also became very important because, again, I wanted to, well, first of all, user experience is very important, and response time goes directly with that. I want people, if they're dealing with me on a support level, I want them to feel like they're getting responses quickly. Even if I can't help them immediately, at least talk to them, because there's nothing more frustrating about support when you feel like you're not being taken care of at all, right? So we spent a lot of time. The collective we, the team, the IN team, spent a lot of time mending fences over the next few months. So I also wanted to take a couple steps early on just to ensure that, because of what I was experiencing, I was like, I don't want anyone else to go through this, right? And what was my biggest problem? Passwords, right? And so there's some very easy things we can do to alleviate some of these issues. First of all, use a password manager, especially if you're in an environment where you have just password after password and accounts, and it just helps. And I know there's some arguments on the security of that, because you do have a single password now that is protecting multiple ones. But in all honesty, I think the benefit outweighs the risk in this sense. Now I started using, initially I'd asked my manager if we were using something centrally in the office, and we weren't at the time. So I started using a little application called KeyPass just on my own. So as I found passwords, could keep track of them. But we ended up starting using a product called LastPass, which we can set up group permissions, and then we can share only the passwords between different groups in our office that need access to those passwords. Document everything as you go. And again, let's go back to the documentation as well that I found. So we had several locations where documentation was being stored. And so it was very difficult to know, what documentation was accurate, right? Because there was multiple copies of it stored in multiple locations. So I could do some guesswork to figure that out. But rather than a file server, try to use, even if it's SharePoint or with Confluence, whatever, something that has some revision control on documentation, so that when you're documenting as you go, you always have the most recent version of the document that you're working on, but you still have previous versions that you can reference. Seriously. I can't tell you how many times over the last year that I kicked myself because I didn't write it down when I was doing it. And I always tell myself, I'm going to do it later. But the problem with later is that you might do it later, but you may actually miss very small things that happened as you were doing it that you'll miss. And you'll end up relearning whatever those little things are all over again. So write it down immediately. So now that things were running, we were ready to start planning for the future. So what were some of our goals for the next year? First of all, the university, our group wanted to provide a university-wide Casper service. And this was something I knew coming in, which is really what interested me in this job to begin with. Because when you come from a department like I was previously at, what ends up happening is you kind of do everything yourself, right? But you have limited time, limited resources, and you have all of these little departments around the university in the same situation. So everyone's coming up with their own little solution, so there's a lot of redundancy. So the idea of being able to provide a framework that departments can leverage was very appealing. One of the requirements that was handed to me was that we wanted a test and production environment that were mirrored closely. We also wanted off-campus device support, so if someone takes a device either home or to another state, we were still in communication with that device. And we needed a separate site for each department. Now around this time, this was around October of 2013, and I think Casper 9 had just been announced around that time, which seemed like perfect timing. Sites, yes, this is great. And I'm sure none of you have heard this over the last week, but there are some site limitations. So site administrators can't add software packages or create scripts. They can't add printers. They can't create directory bindings, and they can't create configurations. There's a lot of other things they can't do as well, but these are the things that we identified in our environment as being at least the most critical. So how do you deal with this, right? So it became very important for us to define a workflow to take these into consideration. So we decided, we have this test and production environment that we're going to be utilizing. So can we leverage that in some way? Can we somehow do that? Because I knew what we could do is, well, first of all, we created a group. We kind of gathered some strategic partners around the university. So we had all these satellite campuses, and we have some fairly large support groups on several campuses. And so we pulled admins in from around to create this group. And these were going to be the individuals who would help us create the workflow and help us sort of define this service as we went along. We were also going to give them elevated privileges in test, but only in the test environment. What does this mean? What elevated privileges did we give them? Just the extra permissions that they couldn't do. So they could add their own software packages, add their own scripts, create their own bindings, create configurations, essentially do things that they needed to do in order to support deploying machines on their campuses and in their groups. Once they set their sites up and they had all of the settings done, We wanted to be able to take that and then migrate it into the production environment, so that in the production environment, they were still only going to be site admins, because we wanted to avoid as much as possible the issues of cross-site contamination, right? So how did we do the migration? Okay, I'm using the redacted thing again just because I spent like 5 minutes on that thing, so I wanted to get my money's worth. So this is a tool. Over the course of the last year, we hired an extra individual. His name is Jason Trotta. He's sitting right there. And Jason created this application called Proton. So what Proton does is it allows you to define a source JSS and a destination JSS. And it's using the API, which this week has been fantastic. There's been a lot of API work over the last week that has, given me some more ideas for Jason to do. But what you can do here is it'll pull down the XML from the source JSS when you click on the import button. And so here you can see there's some software policies, and you can choose what you want to migrate. In this case, we have policies, but you can choose whatever you want to move over. The remove recon, actually, I have a bug fix with that, because it actually should say remove remote. Whenever you use the remote app in Casper, it also creates policies sort of in the background. So we found that as we started importing all of the policies, we were also seeing all of these remote policies that had been created. And so what that does is it sort of filters all that out. So you choose what you want and you migrate, or you just click move a selected policy, and it'll move it over to the destination JSS. The one caveat right now we have is this currently does not move software packages. So we just have to ensure that the software packages exist on the destination JSS before we run the policies to ensure that everything still links up properly. So as we got into this, I started realizing, you know what? We have these site admins now who have elevated privileges. They have the ability to create their own software packages, but guess what? They're not really using it that much. And why is that? Well, we're already doing a lot of the work for them because of the lab build that we have, right? So we have all of this software that we create for the labs. And what we've done is we basically created that, as everyone else has done, as you've seen in other sessions, that we've created a naming scheme. And so anything we create that other sites can use, we preface it with global. If it's site-specific, they have the site name on the beginning of the software package or script or anything else that's in those shared areas. So we came up with this idea for the Casper Enterprise Basic service for other departments who may be lightly managing their devices, or maybe they haven't been managing them at all, right? And so to get them in, we can advertise the fact that, you don't have to do much because you have all this software available out of the bag. You have CS products, Flash, Java, Office, and all of this stuff we update as we update all of the labs. And so we built this into our workflow so that we could provide benefits to departments to getting into this service. The other thing, we took it a step further and we said, you know what, if you have clients that you want to automatically update for several critical critical packages like Java, Flash, we set up an extension attribute that they can choose on the client, or they can provide a group to us and we'll scope it into the policy, and they will automatically get those updates as we create them. And of course, since they can't create their own software, or they can't upload their own software rather, we have a software request system that they can use. It's historically been used for submitting requests to our lab build, but we extended the ability so that they can submit software requests to Casper. If they want, they can also package it as well, and then just provide us with a package and we'll upload it. So how are we doing a year later? It's been a little over a year since I've been there. So how are things going now? Well, first of all, we have the basic enterprise service in beta, so we're pulling sites in right now. We only have 9 sites right now, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but we are treading very lightly as we move forward because our workflow, we just want to ensure that as we bring people in, it's a good service, and we don't want to turn people off immediately by having a rushed bad product. So how about the lab build? Well, we did some lab build improvements. First of all, we sanitized all the global software packages. So things we were packaging for the labs initially had a lot of customizations built into it. So we pulled all the customizations out, and we made those global packages so anyone could use them and they wouldn't get any of the junk that we have to add into the labs. We also proactively packaged software. And what that means is that we spent the summer spending a lot of time contacting individuals who we knew needed software and may not have made requests. Because I didn't want to get into a situation again in August where we had a lot of pending software requests or a lot of last-minute software requests. So we did a lot of time just, again, it was part of the whole customer relations too, keeping that communication open, trying to have a better user experience overall. And Jason also created a little application called the IU Lab Builder. And all that does is, when we have a lot of student helpers around the university in various departments who need to initiate builds. And so we have a group that we add them in, an Active Directory that gives them permission, minimal permission to the JSS to do this. But to simplify the process, this is kind of what kicks everything off. And this was actually used, there was a version of this that was used before I got there, and so we kind of took it and rebuilt it and updated it for Casper 9. So all this does really is you'll see it has local data, it'll show who logged in, that's the builder name, it'll verify the Macintosh HD is named properly, and it'll check to make sure that the lab machine is being built in an area that has an IP range that is one of ours. If it doesn't, it won't work. And then the Casper data is blank right now because there is no computer record currently for this one. But you can name, if you want to rename the machine, you can click Edit, name the machine. You can add an asset tag here because we have asset tags on all of the machines that we deploy. And then you can select the campus. The campus and the build type are just extension attributes. That's all that's getting set. And what that does is it allows us to customize the build based off of what campus they're on and whether or not it's a workstation or an info station. The only difference between those two is that workstation is a full application deployment. Info station is a very limited sort of kiosk style build. You click Update Casper, and that's going to send that XML data back to the JSS, and then it's going to actually pull the data down again and verify the changes had actually been made. And as soon as that happens, the Begin Build button becomes available. They click that, Casper imaging launches at that point. If it's a new record and the computer doesn't exist, they'll have to initially go through the configuration of Casper imaging. If it's an existing machine, historically we've used auto-run data to automatically do that process. We've had some issues recently we're working on, but that's generally the idea of what we do with that. So how about those users that were kind of left out in the university support and nether regions for a very long time, right? How are they doing now? Well, the first week of classes start, and I don't think we actually got a single ticket that week, which made me really nervous. I was telling Jason, you got to prepare for this week. It's going to be crazy. And he's like, yeah, real crazy, Rob. This is real crazy. So I actually got nervous because I'm thinking these people forgot we exist. They think we're gone again, and they're just out there having problems. So I started eliciting responses from those people that I knew had had problems. So what did they say? It was a stark difference between what we had seen before, right? Things just seem to be working. Yeah, no. And sometimes it's not what they say, but how many exclamation points they use, right? So with that, I say, thank you.
If anybody has any questions, I'm going to run around with the microphone. That way we get the question for the video recording as well. Start over here.
So when you came in and people were just sending their support requests into the Netherlands, did you have a working ticketing system that everybody just ignored? Or did you have a defective ticketing system that everybody had been working around for so long that they forgot how to use it? Or
That's a really good question. So I think there was a few factors that had sort of contributed to this. One of them being, I think there was also some reorganization that was happening at the time. And so there was a ticketing system that had been in use, and now they had moved to this ticketing system called Footprints that had a new email address. And so I don't know that these particular users, and it's not that they didn't advertise this new address. Some of these users just don't, I mean, you know, that's not their priority. They just know that they talked to this one individual at some point. And so, but yeah, the weird thing is they were getting passed around from other support units in the university for a while before it actually made it, because that's how I started noticing these things, is it finally did come to our ticketing system. And so that was definitely a problem, but I think part of the contributing factor was just there was some reorg happening, so no one actually knew where those should go. So that was definitely something we had to work on, though.
In your JSS, did you find any anomalies of unknown computers when you did recon to find out what you thought you had as opposed to what you did have, or vice versa?
Yeah, so the way that they had previously done things was that they would manually create computer records before the build process happened. And so, but they would also leave computer records existing when machines might get rebuilt or renamed. And so initially, when I first looked, I was like, man, look at all these machines. But it turns out there was actually a lot of ghost records in there that actually no longer, because you look at the check-in date and they haven't checked in for like, you know, a year or whatever, right? So we definitely had a lot of that. And so we've altered the process now so it's a little more constantly accurate. We don't require the computer to pre-exist before people build them now. And that helps because they don't have to contact us initially, but they still have to be in a certain group. They still have to build the machines on a certain IP. But yeah, we definitely saw that.
So based on you're at now with 9 sites, and how many Macs are you currently managing, and how many more do you think are physically on campus that you will have to manage through your JSS?
So right now, I think the total number between the 2 servers is around 900. And that's not really a lot, but it's getting there. So our goal is to pull in, to make this a service that people want to use and make it as painless as possible. And there's some departments that it might not be the solution for them right now, but I think we're going to see a lot of these smaller pockets of support areas who previously weren't sure what to do with their Macs are going to really, I think, take advantage of this. So I don't know that we're going to, really increase like super, I don't know how, that's the thing is I don't know how many are even out there because, that's one of the reasons we have this initiative is to see if we can get kind of a centralized solution and start getting an idea of how many Macs are in fact there.
Has this helped you wrap your head around software inventory licensing as well? Have you even tried to dive into that at this point?
So we don't use the software licensing within the JSS. Well, we use it a little bit, but we use it more to just track how many installations we have of something. Because a lot of our software licensing at the university is, it allows us to install it on whatever. But someone like Adobe, they say occasionally they may want numbers. We've never been asked for those numbers, but that's why we use the software licensing just to keep track of how many actual deployments we have of that. So
Pretty accurate.
it's yeah, actually it is. It's pretty good for just for the numbers anyway. So.
Are you going to license out the Proton tool to allow other people to benefit from your work?
That is a very good question. And right now, I don't know. I would like to. That's the idea. Right now, it's not quite ready. And there's still some work we have to do on it, I think. It's a good start, and it does solve a very significant problem for us. And I think it would be useful for other institutions. So the idea is we definitely want to make that available if we can. But there's some issues we have to take care of and also some political things we would have to deal with to make sure that would happen. So.
Who's your typical site administrator? I mean, are they first line support, second line support, or is it just, is it?
Who is the site administrators?
Yeah, who's the typical site administrator?
So currently we have, essentially there's sort of two tier levels right now. So there's the Casper admins group that I initially created. And what that group is kind of those higher level admins that are like responsible for a lot of machines at the campus level. But as we're bringing in these sites in the basic service, your mileage may vary on how much experience some of these people might have. In some cases, these departments are very small in some cases with limited support, limited resources, limited staffing. So sometimes you get someone who just doesn't know really a lot. And that's why we have to tread lightly. So we do provide some training as we pull these sites in to make sure they know what they're doing. But that's where the test environment becomes very handy because we're not afraid of them accidentally doing something at this point. But yeah, sometimes it might be the first line of support that we'll get. It'll be someone who's providing first tier support in the department, and sometimes it might be like the manager of that department. So there's some varying levels of knowledge there.
So between day 1 and day 365, at what day did Katie not be a curse word anymore in your vocabulary?
Katie was never a curse word. Katie, because again, Katie was the one who actually was in the two things my manager did. The first thing was he contacted Katie, and Katie was able to send things over. And so she was never a curse word. She was very helpful, and I'm very glad for that. So, and if you don't know Katie, get to know her because she's awesome. So, but there were many curse words aside from that for a while. All right, anything else? Well, thanks a lot, everyone. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to contact me or talk to me afterwards about anything. I'm happy to help and happy to talk with you about anything you might like. So, thanks.